Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Lexington's Community Forum, the State of Kentucky Women Today, Action Plans for the Future. I am Mary Hughes, co-president of the League of Women Voters of Lexington, and I'm here with my co-president, Jennifer Jackson. We have three speakers tonight. Each represents an area of interest to women. Dr. Marlene Helm is acting superintendent of Fayette County Public Schools, and she represents the education portion of our program. Dr. Helm has held various administrative positions with Fayette County Public Schools, including personnel supervisor, director of state and federal programs, director of Early Start, which is care of preschool, assistant to the superintendent, affirmative action officer, and director of elementary schools. Ms. Beth Davisson is vice president of the Kentucky Chamber Workforce Center and represents business. Ms. Davisson is a proven workforce strategist and consensus builder with 5+ years advocating for workforce needs in Kentucky and the U.S. capitals. Our final panelist tonight is Dr. Rochelle Brown, Medical Director of United Healthcare. Dr. Brown is a board-certified internal medicine physician with certification in healthcare quality and management. Each panelist will address concerns in their area of expertise, followed by 1 or 2 action plans for the future. Also joining us tonight is our wonderful group of partners: Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the Frankfort Lexington Chapter, Kentucky of Links Incorporated, the Lexington Chapter of Hadassah, the Lexington Chapter of the NAACP, Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority, and Zeta Phi Beta Sorority. Each of these partners has been instrumental in planning and advertising this event. Our moderator tonight is Renee Shaw. As I said, questions and answers will be held to the end of the panelists' presentations. And now we'll turn the program over to our moderator, Ms. Renee Shaw.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Jennifer, and the League of Women Voters of Lexington, and all of these great sororities and other groups who have come together to bring this program tonight. I am honored to be the moderator in such good company, esteemed company, with these women who are doing so much in their respective fields. And so we want to begin first with Dr. Helm, who certainly is no stranger in education. As you just heard her bio, that all of these bios were truncated for the sake of time, right? Because these women have accomplished so much. We would spend probably 15 minutes just boasting about their accomplishments. And Dr. Helm, certainly you have been the go-to when it comes to acting superintendent. You've really been the one to fill in the gaps so deftly in the times when there was uncertainty in the Fayette County public school system and in the education space in general. So I want to start with you first about when we look at, this is about the state of Kentucky women and how you see that through the lens of education.
Well, I have some slides to share. Is this when we want to share them? And then I'll go from there. Well, as you all know, the pandemic has hit everyone, and it certainly hit the education community very hard. And so I wanted to just, give you a little reminder of where we were and where we are currently. We walked out of the schools on Friday, March 13th, 2020. We should have known something when we exited on that Friday, the 13th. And we were out for almost a year. We were just a couple of weeks shy of being out for 1 full year. So we put together a matrix back in December. The school district lost its beloved superintendent, Emmanuel Kalk, in December. We then went to winter break, and then we welcomed in a brand new board. And, we had the pandemic and weather and all of those things confronting us at once. But women, teachers, educators just seem to know how to step up and get the job done. So during COVID-19, as you can see from our the first PowerPoint, just to give you an idea, because I think sometimes people think that we were out of school and nothing was occurring, and that's not the case. Children were on, online. They were learning. Teachers were teaching. Administrators were administrating, and support individuals were also doing what they needed to do. So our nutrition people were fixing meals, and we had drivers and others delivering meals. And so that's just to give you an idea of how many families we served weekly, because schools are different. They probably are very different from what you might think of when you were in school. And we not only serve meals, we serve breakfast and lunch, but on the weekends we actually send weekend backpacks of food home with families or with children for their weekend. So not only did we do that through our nutrition and transportation, we also provided over 40,000 Chromebooks to make sure that every child had a computer to access the lessons. We provided 2,500 hotspots, and you can see that our tech people were certainly available. They worked Saturdays and Sundays and evenings, because if you think about it, this hit everyone very unexpectedly. Parents were not expected. They didn't know they were going to become teachers overnight, and supporters helping to do homework. And we just had to hit the ground running, if you will, to make sure that that our students had what they needed so that learning could continue. During that year, our student support personnel made over 35,000 home visits. We made home visits when we couldn't reach families, when children somehow disengaged from their lessons, when we, following social media, got word that maybe a student was in distress or a family was in need, because even though the regulations said that families should not be evicted and that students should still be tuned in, that didn't always happen. It wasn't as smooth as we would have hoped that it would have been. So during this whole year, we worked very much in tandem with our partners at the Lexington Fayette Health Department. They helped us to make decisions. And in December, when we came up with the matrix, and if you'll remember, we announced a graduated return plan. And we said, just as soon as we can get into the numbers, get into the colors, if you remember the red, yellow, orange, green, Fayette County was so far into the red that we came up with a purple. We thought we need to let our community visually see just how deep in the red we are, because we knew that this could not be something that just the school district handled. This had to be something that the community stepped up and made the decision that we were going to get our children back in school. So what I will tell you is that kids are very resilient. They were very resilient. Our families were determined to step into this new role that they found themselves. Teachers were extremely creative, making cutouts of famous people and even of their students and putting them in the classrooms as they, if you went by a school on any day during the time that schools were out, if you will, at least the students were not on campus, some of you might have been amazed to see all of the cars that were in the parking lots, because teachers were in the building, sequestered in their classroom teaching. So we don't want families and or the community to think that for a year we did nothing, that students were not learning. They were learning. And that the partnership with the families and the communities helped a great deal. If you could go to the next slide. This is a slide that we may come back to at some point, but there were just a couple of points in here that I want to make sure that you understand about our school system. Because one of the things that is somewhat of a interesting fact, and that is over 70% of the families who reside in Fayette County do not have children in our schools. Let me repeat that. Over 70% of the families that reside in Fayette County do not have children in our schools. Now, they may have grandchildren, they may have nieces and nephews, but so it's important for us to make sure that the information about the schools is communicated in a way that everyone can understand, because it is the community that supports our schools. So this slide, I just wanted you to see where we were in 2006 and where we are today. Just look at the number of children that we had in poverty back in 2006 and compare that to today. Over 6,000 additional children. Look at the percentage of children that we now consider to be eligible for the Federal Meals Assistance Program, 41% to 54%. So our community has certainly changed. The students experiencing homelessness, that number has gone from under 100 to almost 1,000. We have good news too. Look at the students that were in AP classes back in 2006 and the number now. That number was a direct result of some of the visionary work and efforts of Emmanuel Koch as our former superintendent. Look at the backpack program. Whenever I talk to people, this is the one slide, I guess, or the one square in this slide that always makes me just go, I can't believe it. In 2006, we were sending, only one school was participating in the weekend backpack program. And that's a program that sends food and other supplies home with students on the weekend. In 2006, only one school was participating in that. Today, 51 schools are doing that. Again, language is spoken. Look at the number of languages that are now spoken in our school district. When we send notices home, whether it's a robocall or a printed document, we are translating. We currently are translating the eight most frequent languages. But as you can see, again, our community has changed very much. The number of students, in case someone wonders, we are almost 42,000 students. And you see some other numbers there. The diversity, our Latina percentage of families and students has certainly increased from 7% back in 2006 to almost 20%. So that just gives you just a real brief look at the school district then and now. If you'll go to the next slide. These are, I'm going to talk to you very quickly about two issues. You talked about the future. Where are we going? So this summer, we're going to be offering what's called Summer Ignite. It is a summer school program unlike you've ever seen before. It's going to be a lot more like camp, but it's going to be very aggressive. It's going to try and accelerate the learning that students may have not captured or just may needs to be strengthened. But again, I need to remind you that students were learning this past year. They were not just not doing anything. Teachers were teaching and students were learning. The Summer Ignite program, there'll be 3 sessions, June 8th through the 25th, July 6th through the 23rd, and then a 1-week session, July 26th through the 30th. To allow that last week is going to specifically be for those students who are entering into those transition grades. So the kindergarten students that have never set foot into school before, the 5th graders that are going to be transitioning to middle school, the 9th graders that are going to be entering high school. And that was part of the way that we did the graduated return. If you'll remember, we did K2 so that we could get our kindergarten students back into the building for the first time, not back in. And then we did 6, 9, and 12 because we wanted to make sure that students who had never entered their school, they've been at home learning all year, had an opportunity to not only enter their school for the first time, but to really have some very focused and concentrated time with their teachers and their school administrators and support staff. And the schools absolutely loved that idea of having just a small group of students in at one time. And then the last slide is just talking to you about two programs that I think will be very interesting for this particular group of participants and those that have those that have signed in online. RISE is a new program. Again, both of these two programs that I'm going to tell you about are the direct result of the visionary leadership and efforts of our late superintendent, Nanny Kalk, who was just incredibly visionary and incredibly focused on ensuring that there were opportunities for access and future development for all students. But RISE is specifically for girls. It is the STEM version of an academy just for young female scholars so that they can really focus on science and technology and education, engineering and math, and really can just focus. This program is being led by Jennifer Jacobs, and currently it's being housed at Lynn Lee. Both of these programs will have permanent homes, but we're buying up buildings and fixing them, and hopefully we'll have them in their permanent homes soon. The Carter G. Woodson Preparatory Academy for the young students, we already have the program for 6 through 12, the Carter G. Woodson Preparatory Academy, which was started by Roz Aiken and her husband, Dr. C.B. Aiken. It was their vision, and they brought it to Manny, and he was able to do a lot with it. This program is going to be the elementary version of that program, and it will start in August. And it is currently going to be located at the old Johnson Elementary School. Again, it will have a permanent home at some point, but these are two programs specifically for girls and the Carter G. Woodson Boys of Color to really make sure that the future is going to be very bright in Fayette County, because we're providing opportunities that are unique and very focused on in areas that we know that we need to focus on. So hopefully I've given you just a real quick and brief overview of where we were, a little bit about the organization and the history of our district, and a little bit about summer school. And I'll certainly be happy to take questions when we get to that point of the program.
Sure. Dr. Helm, thank you for that presentation. I did want to ask, just while we had you, are you concerned about widening achievement gaps because of this opportunity, this lost year of educational opportunities? Many people will say that, of course, non-traditional instruction pales in comparison to in-person learning. I think most academics would agree that that is not the preferred or optimized method of learning and teaching. And I'm curious about, what have you been able to learn over the course of this year about how kids who are already in the gap, that's been exacerbated, or perhaps those new students who might not have been by the wayside may be falling through the cracks because of the pandemic?
Yeah, it's real interesting because, some students actually did extremely well. They excelled with this, not having to be in a classroom and deal with other issues that might be going on in a classroom. They weren't distracted by things hanging on the wall or other students who might be moving back and forth. Again, many teachers are actually very pleasantly surprised that the students did not lose what they, I think, were fearful of. Now, of course, there are some students that did not engage the way that we had wanted them to, or they became confused or didn't master a subject, but they had an opportunity to talk with the teacher and for the teacher to provide tutoring and one-on-one instruction. So again, when we've looked at some of our preliminary data from some of the early assessments that we've done, teachers are actually quite surprised that they're not where they thought they were going to be, in a bad way. So
Right.
they're very positive. Now we're getting ready to do the state mandated testing that will start pretty soon. The state tried to get an exception or an exemption from the federal government, because we thought we don't want to spend these precious days and weeks testing. But the federal government said we really do need to know where these students are. And that information will serve as the foundation for the work that will be done this summer. So every school, 69 schools, will have summer academies, 69 schools.
Wow.
And invitations will start going out on, I think on Friday, to students, to families, to let them know what will be offered at their school. Each school will offer a different program, but they will offer a program based on the data and what they're finding, what the teachers and the support staff are finding in that school. Then the school has now developed a program for this summer to help address that. And there's just going to be accelerated learning. So opportunities for students to really catch up, to affirm, I thought I knew how to do fractions and I slipped a little. Okay, let's go back. Okay, you got it. Okay.
Right.
We're, in a way, we're not wasting any time whatsoever with some of the extra things that maybe we would have done in a typical school year. We're going straight for the meat of the lesson and getting it done and moving on. And we're checking students. If you already know how to do it, then we're not going through that lesson. We're just moving through. So I think this has been kind of an eye-opening experience, not one that we want to repeat, mind you,
Right.
but it's been kind of an eye-opening experience for all of us that students can do more than perhaps we've given them credit for in the past. Parents have stepped up that said, I can't do math, I can't do science, and they've just amazed themselves. We've actually had some parents who have completed their own education during this period. We've had parents who have received their GED. We've had other parents that have learned how to use the computer that, they had just kind of put it off. We've had grandparents step up. We've decided to just, take this lemon called the pandemic and make really good lemonade with it.
Yeah. And of course, educators have stepped up in magnificent ways.
Unbelievable.
Them enough praise for how much they've endured and helped all kids who needed a little push and some extra encouragement. And I'll ask you later there's a lot of question about youth mental health and how
Yes.
this pandemic and the socialization lacks, how that could affect kids. And we'll talk about that a little later. I do want to segue now to Beth Davisson, because so much of what you talked about, Dr. Helm, in terms of, ironically, the silver lining to this pandemic and NTI has been family literacy and family educational opportunities that may not have existed before. And hearing that people have gotten their GED during this time or may even be pursuing other degrees. I mean, we don't hear that narrative very often when we talk about the educational story of COVID-19. And one thing that I know you're really focused on, Beth, is women in the workplace and how they have been severely impacted by COVID-19. I think the latest nationwide studies show that 3 million women have been affected by this. And so I know you've got a great presentation to bring us up to speed on how women have been impacted by COVID-19 and other workplace challenges.
Thank you, Renee. I'm really glad to be here and very appreciative to the League of Women Voters in Lexington for having me, and want to just reiterate what Renee just said about, our teachers that have gone above and beyond. In being on a panel with Dr. Helm and Dr. Brown, I joked in the pre-room that I'm the only one with the not doctorate on the panel, but when I'm just looking at Dr. Helm and Dr. Brown and what they've done for our state in the last year for our kids, for just taking care of our citizens' health and well-being during this. Just thank you. And it's a real honor to be here with you. So yes, I want to talk to you about what the impact of the workforce on women and what we've seen in Kentucky. Jennifer, if you want to advance a few slides. So this basically is just a slide to show you all of my bosses. These are business leaders from Pikeville to Paducah. The Kentucky Chamber is the state's largest business association. And so we act and work on behalf of business, and our interest with my job is really to help create a stronger and better workforce for healthier Kentuckians that can then run a better economy. And some of the impacts we've seen in Kentucky is we've not fared very well from this pandemic from an economic or workforce perspective. In fact, Kentucky's been a top 5 state in the nation when it comes to having the most unemployment claims in the country. When you look at that, we're a top 5 state for most unemployment claims, and then also a top 5 state when it comes to vulnerable jobs. Vulnerable jobs means jobs that might not be coming back as a result of the pandemic because of economic circumstances, technological advances that have modernized the workplace and taking away some of these jobs. And when we look at who's been most impacted in our state, it's women. Specifically, it's our Black and our brown citizens. It is individuals, the lower education attainment levels that you have in Kentucky, the more likely you are to have one of these vulnerable jobs or have lost a job as a result of the pandemic. In fact, in our state, if you hold under a bachelor's degree, you are twice as likely to have lost your job as a result of this pandemic. And it's our individuals that make under $40,000 a year. So what we're seeing is that the pandemic it's shining a light on our inequities and really pulling that out. So Jennifer, if we advance one more slide, we'll go a couple more for me, Jennifer, please. Thank you. Yeah, there we go. So in terms of labor force participation, that means the amount of citizens we have that are actively working. It's a really good indicator of how well your state's doing as a workforce, of how strong then your economy can be, because you can't really ever have a workforce. You can't have an economy without a workforce, right? Those two things have to be strong for your state to be strong. And in our state, we, before the pandemic, were 40th in the nation when it came to workforce participation, which meant that, you know, in terms of our citizens showing up, being able-bodied, able to work, we were 40th. During the pandemic at its height, we were actually fell to 50th in the nation. So worst performing state in the country in terms of our citizens going to work. And with the exception of West Virginia now, we actually, with all of our border states, hold the lowest workforce participation rate among every border state that we have. Let me go one more, Jennifer. And this starts to get into where we're seeing jobs being lost and where we've seen our economy get hit as a result of the pandemic. What we've seen is at the height of the pandemic, we lost nearly 300,000 jobs. So overnight, I mean, you all can all remember back in February of 2020, we were all experiencing this thriving economy, one that we were really, you know, it was at the height of things. And overnight, businesses, as a necessity to keep our citizens safe, had to shut down. And so in April, at what we would say is the height of the economic impact, we lost nearly 300,000 jobs. We've made up a lot of that ground. Now we've lost just as a net loss of 60,000 jobs. With 300,000 to 60,000 jobs. We're making some economic ground, but 60,000 jobs is still a lot of jobs. In fact, that's nearly 5 years of the past economic progress we've seen happen in our state. And when you look at which sectors, this starts to get into how and why women have been hit so disproportionately. We saw certain sectors like logistics. Kentucky is a big logistics state. Logistics actually grew. So think about it. We're all at home ordering from Amazon. Kentucky is within a day's drive of 2/3 of the nation's population. So logistics doing well nationally was very good for our state, but other sectors such as hospitality and leisure got incredibly hit, as we all know. Logistics, pretty male-dominated sector, but leisure and hospitality are pretty female-dominated. So we saw those sectors that were mainly male-dominated get less impacted. They were pretty insulated from these hits, while dominated sectors by women were more impacted. And so that was a lot of the job loss. If we go one more slide. So we look at that impact on women, and what we've seen is between women losing jobs that were a result of economic impact. So not women that exited out by choice, but were forced out. When we look at that, and then we look at the amount of women which had to leave due to childcare issues, which we're going to talk about in just a second, we've actually not had this few women participating in the workforce since the late 1990s. Not even during the last Great Recession did we see this many women leave the workforce. And we would say, well, okay, late 1990s isn't that far away. But if we are all honest with ourselves, that's over 20 years of workforce progression in the history of the working women. And that is a long time. So in a sense, we've dialed back a couple decades on progress of the women and the amount of women that we've seen exit. If we go one more slide. Thank you, Jennifer. Most of the unemployment claims for the first time in history, which is unprecedented, were made up by women. And most of those unemployment claims came from parents that had children that were 12 years of older, that were 12 years and younger. And if we keep going forward, so if we look at the women that had to leave and reasons why they left, nearly 100,000 women exited the workforce due to childcare issues. Childcare issues such as that preschool closures or from K through 12 closures. And in fact, if you look at those 100,000 women, if you take every other reason due to the pandemic, work infection spreads, economic closures, take all those reasons, and all those reasons combined still don't lead to the amount of women that had to exit to take care of children during this time. And if we go one more slide, Jennifer, and go one more, thank you. Yeah, so this is the slide. So if you look at that top bar right there, that's the amount of women that left due to childcare issues. And then all the other reasons below that are more COVID related, economic related, are the reasons that we were just talking about. And when we think about, you know, some of the impacts moving forward, pre-COVID, before we had the pandemic, nearly 50% of Kentuckians lived in what we call a childcare desert, which means that most Kentuckians didn't have enough access to childcare back then. We know since that a lot of daycares have closed as a result of the pandemic, leaving more of this desert prevalent. And so we really have to think about ways that we're going to get women back into the workforce by getting much more child care support. We know schools are opening. That's going to, you know, that was something that was necessary as a result of the pandemic, and that will help. But we still have to think about after child care, after school care, preschool care, to make sure that our women really can get back into the workforce. And if we go one more. There was something else when you think about the sectors and the impact. I loved hearing about the RISE impact that Dr. Helm brought up with the women, getting women into those STEM fields. And we're going to talk to Dr. Brown, who is a woman in STEM. And you know, that's so important when you think about this industry impact that we've seen women get really impacted from leisure and hospitality. And we see the male dominated industries that weren't as hit by the pandemic, but then the ones that were more female dominated. We've really got to work to skill up and educate our workforce and our women, because we saw so many women and so many of our Kentuckians, the one that hit the most really had to do with that education pathway, really empowering women to get into those post-secondary education attainment levels in Kentucky so that we can get empowered to stay within the workforce and keep Kentucky healthy.
So a real quick question to you, Beth. You talked about that 100,000 plus Kentucky women who have exited the workforce because of childcare concerns. Is there any way to measure how many may return? And if our labor participation rate will increase on the other side of COVID, and what will those jobs look like that many women predominantly occupy that have been most affected by the pandemic?
Yeah, so the labor force participation rate is something we're watching like a hawk. You know, at one point we fell to 50. I think we're now at 46. We're basically just playing like musical chairs with the last 6 states, unfortunately. And what we see when labor force participation rates are down is very dangerous. So when the lower we go in workforce participation, we see higher rates of incarceration. We see higher rates of overdose death rates in Kentucky. In fact, for every point that unemployment goes up by 1, the overdose death rate will go up by 3.3%. So the health of our Kentuckians when they're working is so much better when they're not. So we are really hoping that we can get the workforce participation rate up. I do think a critical element to that will be turning on the job search waiver within the unemployment insurance benefits. Right now, when you're on unemployment, you don't have to show proof of looking for a job. It was a necessary move back in March of 2020 when the economy was shutting down. But right now we have got on our Kentucky Chamber website 96,000 open jobs. Our employers and businesses are looking for talent like crazy. And one thing we found, and hopefully I wonder if Dr. Brown can back me up in this, employers are doing a great job at getting their employees vaccinated. Being employed is a wonderful pathway to getting vaccinated from COVID. And so we really want to get that job search waiver turned back on so that our Kentuckians can start taking a look at these 100,000 jobs that are out there and get back into the workforce, get healthy, get COVID vaccinated, and get Kentucky running again. I think in the way that we fought to protect our Kentuckians against COVID, we now have to turn that lens towards fighting for our workforce and our economy.
What are the sectors in which those 100,000 jobs nearly are waiting for Kentuckians to grab?
Absolutely. So a lot of jobs open in healthcare, logistics, manufacturing, construction,
right? Yeah.
I mean, there are so many jobs available out there of many different varieties. And the last thing I'll say is what we're seeing is that, in the next 5 years, 1/3 of these frontline jobs are going to go away. So the jobs that take just the high school degree. So what we really have got to get primed up in Kentucky is get our citizens on that pathway towards attaining more education so that they're ready for those second, third, mid-tier level jobs that require more education and more earnings here in Kentucky.
And I know that you've been collaborating with the Council on Post-Secondary Education. I've had programs on when you've been on with Aaron Thompson to talk about how you get 60% of the Kentucky population being degree earning by the year 2030. And I know that the Chamber has been really instrumental in looking at that felon reentry piece in order to get them back in the workforce, because we know there's a lot of talent from folks who have been formerly incarcerated. And there was some legislation this past session that addressed employability of the formerly incarcerated.
That's right. It's something we absolutely believe in. We believe the formerly incarcerated, our returning citizens, really are an untapped talent pool. When you look at the studies from employers that are fair chance, second chance employers, it will show you time and time again, these employees retain longer, they're more productive, and they miss fewer days at work.
And we know that 95% of those who have been incarcerated will get out. So we want to make sure that employability has often been the barrier that's often exacerbated recidivism. So if they don't have a job, they return to a life of crime. So this is one way to be very proactive in that, is make sure that they find a job and keep a job and can move up during a job. And there's some great programs and testimonials that I've seen you share with folks about those who've done exemplary work on the other side. Dr. Rochelle Brown, last but not least, we're so excited to have you with us this evening. And there's so much we could talk about when it comes to health advocacy. And I'll let you do your presentation first, and I have lots of questions on the other side. But welcome, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. And let me just clarify, are you going to advance my slides for me, Jen, or do you want me to share? She's on mute.
I can do it for you if that's
okay. That sounds fine. I'm happy either way. Yes, I'm very happy to be here, and it's been great listening to the other speakers because these issues are so intertwined, as Beth alluded to. Education is obviously important to our health outcomes, and our employment status is definitely, and our health is interrelated with our ability to work. So this is a great topic, very timely. You can go to the next slide. When white America sneezes, Black America catches pneumonia. This is an old axiom that's derived from when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. And so once again, this cliche has proven itself true with COVID. It could also be extrapolated to other vulnerable populations, other demographic. Like it's the same populations that get disproportionately affected during natural disasters, during health crises, during environmental crises. So it's the same, different day, same story, whatever that saying is. So I think the best place to start in looking at the broad topic of health advocacy is to look at health disparities, but through a lens of the COVID-19 pandemic, because it's the obvious prominent issue right now. And it demonstrates so many issues involving health disparities. Health disparities clearly preceded the COVID pandemic, and they will persist beyond. So I think it's important to look at it through COVID, but realize that the issues are going to persist and need to be addressed from that standpoint. Hopefully, though, the pandemic sort of pulled back the curtain on some of the weaknesses in our system, our economy, our public health structure, our infrastructure, so that not if there's another crisis, but when the next crisis hits, we'll be better prepared. Next slide, please. I like graphs. I'll go ahead and tell you. I use a lot of graphs, and I don't want to overwhelm anyone, but I think that for people who are visual, some of these points are just better made visually. So this is a graph of the COVID cases. This is the US numbers. And it's just important to note, many of you have seen this, I'm sure it's on the news often, but the numbers, the first case was in January of 2020. And then this graph shows the current date. But you can see there was a steady climb of cases with little surges and resurgence all the way up to the big peak over the winter, which was attributed to the holidays. And then there was this rapid, steep decline since January. And you can see here, this is current. There may be an uptick. It's unclear, whether that will turn out to be an actual surge, another surge, or if it's going to plateau, or if it will decrease. But it does look like the numbers are trending back up. And to date, there have been, I've had to update this 3 or 4 times because every day that I come back to this presentation, the numbers have increased, unfortunately. But we're at 31.3 million cases in the US with 562,000 deaths. Okay, next slide, please. And this curve shows relatively the same time period, but in Kentucky. So generally the same shape. You still see the steady increase of cases, although it's less steep than the national data. And you still see that peak around the winter and a steady decline. And then you see maybe, again, a slight uptick or plateau. It's unclear of what's going to happen. And in terms of Kentucky data, we're up to 433,000 cases and 6,257 deaths. Right now, COVID is ranked as the 3rd leading cause of death in Kentucky. And even though the numbers are decreasing, again, we just don't know if that's going to go up further. So to be determined. Next slide, please. All right. Let's see. And this is showing that same US data, but segregated by minority group, by racial ethnic group. And so it's the same numbers, but you'll note that the top few lines, which are colored, they're sort of hard to see, but the take home point is that all the ethnic groups or racial groups with the exception of Asian had significantly higher rates. And this was from the summer. This was from July of 2020. So around the summer, the rates were much higher in Black, Hispanic, Alaska Native, American Indian populations. And that continued with large peaks. And this was the Alaska Native American Indian population that had worse numbers over the winter. And then next slide, please. Next. Okay, and this is the same graph. This is just showing a different. Yep, there we go. A different time point. So this is comparing the summer to now looking at current time. And you'll see that all those colored lines are starting to converge. So although there's a slightly higher rate among Hispanics, we're now looking at relatively similar rates among all of the ethnic groups. So I point this out, but it's certainly no indication that, oh, yay, health disparities are over. You know, it just is what it is. And we'll get into maybe a reflection of why some of those trends happen. Okay, next slide, please. And this is some CDC data looking at the rates of infection, hospitalization, and death segregated by race and ethnicity. And the important thing to see here is that all of the minority groups, with the exception of Asian, had higher rates compared to the white population. And you'll note that in terms of overall cases, the numbers are, you know, roughly a little over 1 time. Some of them are, you know, they're not quite double. But when you look at hospitalization and death, you have much higher proportions. So, you know, double to sometimes 3 times rates in certain groups compared to the white population. So I think this reflects that although the case numbers, again, even now, may be similar, there still are going to be differences in terms of the severity of illness and death. So disparity is not over. Okay, you can advance to the next slide, please. And this is showing similar information to what we looked at in the national data. So looking at death rates in Kentucky segregated by race. And this is from June 2020. So similar to that time period from the national slide from summer of 2020. Right here at the second bar, you can see that although Blacks make up 8.4% of Kentucky population, they represented 17.54% of deaths. So a pretty significant overrepresentation of death in the Black population. Next slide, please. And this is looking at the current date. So it's different data sets, but you know, just to point out that now, as of April, the percentages are roughly representative of the percentage of Blacks in the population. So our numbers have improved, but again, like the national data, I don't think that this means that health disparities have been cured. I think it just, you know, reflects some of the reporting. I think it reflects vaccination, some other things. But again, the disparities were there, they were real, and again, may have reflected different severity of illness at that time. Next slide, please. This slide represents COVID rates in Kentucky by gender. And the split between male and female is roughly the same, with a slight preponderance of cases in women and in death rates. I think it's I can't even see that small. It's 52.48% of cases in women and 50.6% of deaths. So very similar. And next slide, please. I'm not going to dwell on this at all very long. I put in a slide here, which Beth just covered extremely well, so I won't dwell on it, but just to show, just to demonstrate that even though the rates may be roughly the same, that women overall have been experiencing, the pandemic has been hitting them more heavily. They've had more of an impact from the pandemic because of, likely because of their industry, the industries that they're in. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about health disparities. So we've seen that there were different rates amongst racial groups in rates of COVID. You know, this disease really hit vulnerable, disadvantaged populations the worst. So a health disparity is just a higher burden of illness, injury, disability, or mortality experienced by one group relative to another. We commonly look at these disparities through the lens of race and ethnicity. But just remember that, you know, there are a lot of other demographic ways that we see health disparities: socioeconomic status, age, geography, language, gender, disability status, citizenship status, and sexual identity and orientation. And we know from research that disparities in health that are based on race and social class often persist throughout the lifetime. So unfortunately, people don't outgrow these disparities. The same populations that are vulnerable tend to stay vulnerable. In this, on the right side of the slide, these measures were from the 2017 Minority Health Status Report. And these were all domains in which health disparities were identified in Kentucky. And it included, but certainly not limited to, life expectancy, infant mortality rate, adult mortality rate, in particular cancer. And of note, it was prostate, breast, and colorectal, all of which have good screening tests, unfortunately. Asthma, diabetes, oral health, mental health, overweight and obesity, sexually transmitted infections, HIV, and preventive health screenings. Next slide, please. So why do these health disparities exist? This is based on the social determinants of health model. And you can see that there's a variety of contributing factors to health disparities, including economic stability, neighborhood and physical environment, education, food availability, community and social context, and general factors related to the system, the healthcare system. And I like this model from the Kaiser Family Foundation because they have included racism and discrimination as a through line that crosses through every domain, and it can impact every individual factor here. And it's also important to note that these factors can intersect and interact, and they can cause sort of multiplied or compounded effects of health disparities. Next slide, please. And so every single one of those factors is important. Every single one of them can cause a health disparity, but I think access to care is one that's certainly important. People need access to comprehensive, timely, quality health care. We know from research that people that don't have insurance live sicker and die younger. We know that people that have a usual source of care, such as a primary care physician or at least a facility, a healthcare system that they are a part of, they tend to have better health outcomes and fewer disparities, and also their care occurs at a lower cost. And we also know that healthcare can be very expensive. The average American spends $11,000 per year on their personal health care, and this does not take into account extra expenses related to COVID or just unforeseen illness, accidents. So healthcare can be very expensive. Next slide, please. This is some data on Kentucky, and there are lots of rankings, health ranking platforms out there, but Kentucky seems to fall 43 or 44th on several of the health rankings. And, you know, we're unfortunately amongst the lower, in the bottom 10, not top 10. We're in the bottom 10 on multiple domains: depression, frequent mental distress, drug deaths, premature deaths, frequent physical distress, multiple chronic conditions, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and obesity. Next slide, please. And this slide, it's small. I don't necessarily want to point out every detail, but this is showing, this was another health ranking, again, focused on Kentucky. And this one was good because it's segregated by gender. So this is just looking at Kentucky women. And this first slide is clinical measures. And so you may not be able to see, maybe you can, but there were, you know, they rank each domain. So Kentucky women ranked 28th in the nation overall on clinical care measures, 20th for access to care, 22nd for preventive clinical care, 42nd for quality of care. And that was driven down largely by being 49th for maternity practices in infant nutrition and care. You can click forward. This next domain is health behaviors. Kentucky women ranked 47th overall in health behaviors, ranging between 32nd and 45th. And 45th was for nutrition and physical activity, and 49th in tobacco use. And you can click forward one more time. This last one is health outcomes. And so Kentucky women ranked 49th overall, 39th in behavioral health, 47th in mortality, 45th in physical health, and 48th for multiple chronic conditions. All right, next slide, please. All right, so, you know, we went through all of the contributing factors, or many of the contributing factors to health disparities. There are a number of them. They're complex. Some of them don't have clear-cut, easy interventions. So therefore the solutions aren't going to be easy. So, you know, figuring out how to tackle them is tough. but health disparities are largely avoidable. I think, the first step is making it a priority. We have to, the stakeholders have to consider it a priority. There needs to be a supportive infrastructure, including resources and money. And there needs to be an attempt to eliminate racism and bias in the system, because it is such an important factor on all of those domains. So I would say, in summary, that the current state of women in Kentucky is that women are struggling in terms of health outcomes. We've talked about, their job situation, their unemployment. So I think, it's going to be a tough hill to climb to address all of these, but I don't know. I'm open to ideas. So we'll talk about some ideas probably, but I think it's going to take focused targeting and not sort of being overwhelmed by the enormous task, and just focusing on things that have evidence-based interventions that you can do, like smoking cessation or addressing maternal health, some of those interventions. So I'll end there.
Dr. Brown, I want to pick up on that last point about maternal health, because when you showed us the slide about Kentucky rankings, there didn't seem to be a number for maternal mortality in Kentucky, where we rank in that, unless I just missed it. And I know that this is Maternal Health Week, and it's Minority Mental Month. And so I think this is an important conversation to have, regardless of the month, about minority mental health and these social determinants of health, which you've pointed out to us, about your zip code, your bank account, and all of that being a determinant on how healthy you are. And the whole point of living sicker and dying younger, I mean, that really does strike a chord.
I see it on there. It's on there, but for some reason it's not ranked, and I actually don't know where. Let's see. It's I just saw, that's on behaviors. It needs to, that slide is an action slide. So it's either click forward. Yeah. Health outcomes. It's right here.
Okay. There we are.
Women.
Yeah.
Mortality. Oh no, there it does have a ranking. What's that say for? I'm vision impaired today. 47th. So we're ranked 47th. Yeah. And here's mortality rate, 48th. So it's not good.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate, and it's interesting because Kentucky is not doing so bad in terms of having an insured population. So there's something, it's not so clear cut as just, if everyone, I think it's great that Connect is coming back and that, people are getting insurance. So we shouldn't not do that. But I think it drives home the point that there's something beyond that in our state. It's not just getting people insured. There's still these outcomes. I think, it has to do with our poverty rate and some other factors. But it's disappointing for sure.
I think that's an important point that you just made about it's not always an access to care issue, that there's other things at play, whether that's education about lifestyle choices. And we know that our lung cancer rates are, I think we're the first in mortality when it comes to lung cancer and child abuse rates. I mean, we're leading the nation in that. So there's lots of things that preventive that we could be employing that we're not doing for whatever reason. Okay, I do want to get to some questions now. This is always an interesting part of this. And I want to go back to, I'm going to read the screen and try to see it. This is going back to Dr. Helm. Maureen Murphy, thank you for this really good question. The children have experienced losses this past year, not just socializing, but death of family members and family stress due to economic issues. Besides teaching curriculum, how are these other needs being met throughout the year? And this goes to that question about mental health being more of an issue now than perhaps pre-COVID pandemic.
Right. And in one of the slides, I shared that, our student support team has made over 35,000 home visits and provided support. There's been almost 50,000 contacts. So yes, we know that our students, even though they are resilient, they have experienced some of the very same things that we as adults have experienced. I mean, this year has impacted and affected all of us, whether it's made us more anxious, whether we've experienced stress, loneliness, the social isolation, the uncertainty, all of those things. And students sometimes don't have the skill set to handle those. So we have tried to make sure that every student has at least one adult in their school that they can go to. And we do that both when the students are in school and even during this past year, because we want to make sure that students know and feel that they have at least one adult that is there to advocate for them, so that they don't have to keep whatever it is that they may be experiencing, or they've seen something, or they've heard something, or they're feeling in a certain way. We want them to feel that there's someone that they can go to and talk with. So every school has got social workers, we've got school psychologists, we've got mental health supporters, we have, counselors. Again, the schools of today look nothing like the schools perhaps that most of us attended. The supports that are in there are just so much stronger and more attuned to meet the students where they are. So students can reach out and, get help and support regardless of what's going on. And we have to remember, for some of our students, school is the very best part of their day and maybe even of their life. So when they're not in school, some students, are at a loss, because that's where they got their support. They could walk into an office and get support from an adult. They could walk. A lot of our schools now have clinics. I didn't mention that. A lot of our schools have clinics, so they can, go into the clinic. And then just their teachers and other adults that we have tried to make sure they have a relationship with, like I said, at least one person in every school. So we have done, as much with the academic side as we have with the support side, because I'm sure Dr. Brown would agree, we have to educate and treat the whole child. We can't, because the whole child is coming to school, and we have to make sure that we're meeting them where they are and providing the support structures and other things that they need.
For those children who had special needs, whether it was occupational therapies or other therapies, was that a seamless transition to being in on the school campus and maybe having these outside services come into the home? Or how could that even possibly happen when you had some COVID restrictions that would have prevented that type of interaction?
Right. Yeah. A lot of our health services, like the OT and PT, we were not able to do those as much as we were able to do some others. And so we'll be providing families with what we call compensatory services. So if your child missed some of those services, we'll be, offering those services on a ramped up schedule. But, if you're supposed to get OT 3 times a week, us, doing what we can and then trying to come back in the summer and make it up or to get, those kinds of things are a little bit more challenging to ramp up and to catch up. So, we've had to work with parents to say, okay, this is how you do this kind of therapy. Even our speech language pathologists, when coming back into the schools, when you've got on a mask, how does a speech language pathologist really get at that you're making, that you're forming the words correctly, that you're doing what you need to do with the tongue and the lips to make the sound. So we still have some challenges, but our educators and support staff have just been so creative and so intent to make sure that no child went without some of the basics that they needed during this long, challenging year.
One of the questions, it comes with a great setup that I won't read in its entirety, but those who can access the chat can. Talks about Lexington dealing clearly with a housing affordability crisis. Over 800 of our children are experiencing homelessness. Do you know why the city of Lexington claims to know of 689 citizens dealing with homelessness, but the school system counts over 800 children alone experiencing homelessness? Is there a disparity that you can speak to and clarify there, Dr. Helm?
The only thing I can think of is that if there may be 600 adults, but each one of those adults may have more than one child. So that may be why the numbers are not exactly equal. I'm not quite sure, but you know, and we may take a snapshot of these statistics at different points and times, and that may be a cause for some of the discrepancy in the numbers as well.
One last question to you before I go to the other panelists. We know that the Kentucky legislature passed a law that would allow for a supplemental year, a due, if you will, right? And that
Yes.
the local board has to decide that outright. It can't be on a case-by-case or individual basis. They have to decide if all or none can repeat a school year. Your thoughts on that action?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. We just had our the board had their monthly planning work session last evening, and we gave them a pretty thorough overview of Senate Bill 128, the supplemental year bill. And then the Education Commissioner had his monthly webinar today and did the same thing. So I think everyone is very focused on this supplemental year bill. The information will go live within our district on Thursday so that families will know. They'll have the form that they can fill out if they have an interest. We're encouraging families to really think about what this may mean for their child, because if a teacher and a family believe that a child needs to have a do-over, repeat the grade, or to repeat the experience, the teacher will be talking with the family about that. But some families may make the determination that they think their child, for whatever reason, needs the opportunity to, take the year over. But it is, like you said, it's an all or nothing. So after we receive the interest from families, they have until May 1st to fill out the form and to let the district know of their interest. Then we will come back with that information and present it to the board. And then the board will have until June 1 to make that determination. Some of the things that we have to consider are some of our schools are very overcrowded. We were mentioning last night, I think we were talking about, we have a new middle school that's in the works, and we were sharing with the board members that the middle school will have the capacity for 1,200. And one board member said, 1,200 at a middle school? Yes, we have several middle schools that are way over 1,000, and 1,200 is no longer considered to be, a number that is shocking to most people. So there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to have to consider. Do our schools have the capacity for a large number of students to have a repeat year? Do families really understand what that means? So if a student who's an athlete who's thinking, oh, I'll get a chance to play again, that student and the family needs to understand that you still have to take at least 4 hours of academic work, and you still have to remain academically eligible. So again, on Thursday, we'll be getting that information out to families so that they can make an informed decision on what's best for their particular student. And we all know, those of us that are parents know that, each child is different, and you have to make sometimes different decisions for each one of them. So hopefully it'll be a family decision and not one that just is left with mom and dad, because, we need the student to be in on that decision as well.
Yeah, we'll keep following that as it progresses. Beth Davisson, the non-doctor, but still full of knowledge. This question to you, and this is a good question because we know that Kentucky has received more than $2 billion from the federal government because of the American Rescue Plan from Congress. And so the question is, do you think that some of those dollars will actually go to fund childcare? Do you know anything about that? Is that in the works?
I'm not sure. I hope so. I mean, I think when we look at the childcare issues and just how many women have exited the workforce due to childcare issues, we have to do something. And I think it takes a multi-pronged approach on a federal, a state, and in an employer level. Renee, when we were on your show a couple months ago, was it GE? I mean, you saw even employers stepping up in these really wonderful ways to support their employees understanding childcare issues. And so what I hope this pandemic has taught us is that well, one, it takes a village, right? Like we all have to step up and do our part. And then the other part is we can't continue to leave behind people. It ethically, morally is never the right thing to do. But the other side of the equation is not the healthy thing to do. I mean, you just saw Dr. Brown's stats, like it's the wrong move. And it has just terrible impacts in so many different ways. So I think when you think about childcare issues, it's just it's got to be a multi-prong approach to really support our families and get them back into the workplace.
And one of the things that we've discussed on a previous program before the one you just mentioned, when we had a child care forum, and we talked about the child care desert issue that we're facing in Kentucky, where 50%, don't have an option or very few options. One of the things that came up was about professionalizing early childhood educators, right? That they're paid according to their level of expertise and knowledge, and that somehow there's got to be a rejuvenation and an appreciation of the work that goes into that profession. So is that part of filling in some of these childcare deserts, or is that an outlier concern?
I think it's such a critical point, Renee, and it's one we can't do without. In Kentucky, 50% of our kids show up not prepared for kindergarten. And if you're a kid that shows up behind in kindergarten, the lasting impacts, and Dr. Helm could probably speak to this way better than I could, but the lasting impact of what that looks like for a child going through the continuum of education and what that means to their future career. And way too often, we find that those children are underserved kids, that they start off, not on a fair playing field to begin with, and then they show up not ready for kindergarten, and then that ripple effect throughout the continuum of school continues, and it's hard to come back from that.
Yeah, and some good news also from the legislature is that some of the CARES money, or not CARES money, this is the ARPA money, American Rescue Plan Act, is being used for full day kindergarten. Yes. Now, day kindergarten will be paid for statewide. So we know that districts have either used a combination of tuition or taxes or whatever to make up for half day kindergarten. But for the first time in Kentucky, there'll be full day kindergarten across the state. That's $140 million to do that. And we hope, that's a recurring expense. So we've got the money now. So I don't know how they plan on making sure that that's provided for once this money is exhausted, but that's one good step in the right direction. We still haven't gotten to the pre-K part, but at least we're there with the kindergartners. And I know Dr. Helm can probably remark about how we often hear that if a child can't read well by the third grade, that many states base their building of correctional facilities based on third grade reading data. Is that just a misnomer or something that we hear touted without any substantiation, or is that really true?
Well, I haven't worked with, any planners for penal institutions, but we know that children learn best to read at an early age. We need to make sure that they are reading as close to grade level as possible, yes, by the end of third grade. So whether penal institutions are, making determinations about that, it is a widely held, axiom, as Dr. Brown said earlier. There are things that are out there that I don't know that you can actually put your finger on, but you are told that is, a piece of data that certainly is useful and helpful. But we always try to let students know that you can, and that your current situation is not your final situation. And just because you're reading not where you want to read, or need to read at this level, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that children are ready for the future. And, we're preparing children not just for the next grade. We really are providing them with the foundations that they need for life skills. And it's a partnership. We don't get children until they're 5 or 6. Now, sometimes with preschool, we get them, 3 and 4 year olds. But I will throw this in. Fayette County does treat its preschool teachers as full teachers. They are paid off the teacher salary schedule. So they are highly qualified and compensated at the level. I don't think we can ever say that teachers are are paid exactly what they're worth. And I think many, many families who have experienced this past year being their child's teacher, I think there's certainly a renewed appreciation for the extraordinary work that teachers do and do so very well.
Absolutely. Amen to that. And before we go to health, because we're going to get to Dr. Brown, there is this question. It's a good question. Do you anticipate, Dr. Helm, that there'll be an overcrowding issue due to the school choice bill that was recently, now it's going to become law?
Well, you're referring to House Bill 563.
That's correct,
and we believe that there's going to be probably some legal action or some legal things that done. Keep in mind that bill does not go into effect until the following school year. That is not a bill that is effective this year because districts will need time to prepare policy and all sorts of other things in anticipation of that. But
so next July 1st of 2022, right?
Yes.
Effect, right. And it'd be interesting to see, there's $25 million that's available for these tax credits, and we'll see what happens if you don't reach that cap or even exceed it. So we'll see how the interest goes with that. And we'll see if other schools who've been able to charge tuition, if they raise tuition where it prices maybe undesirable students out of the market for going there, who the legislation said targeted to help. So we'll see.
Yeah, and that's $25 million that public schools could certainly use for some of the unfunded mandates that we have on the books that we're having to take out of local dollars. Things like transportation. We have loads of transportation costs that are not fully reimbursed by the state. Yeah. So I think there are lots of other things that we could have done before moving on to this particular bill.
So now we're going to segue into some questions for Dr. Brown about health care. And this question from an anonymous person at Kentuckians said they found themselves unable to access COVID testing and care due to ability to pay. Now, COVID testing should be free for the most part, correct?
Yes, that's my understanding. And I'm biased in that I'm basing that mostly on Lexington. So I can't say with certainty that maybe they're not counties but my understanding is that testing you should be able to find some place with free testing. And same with the vaccine is largely, provided free. In terms of care for COVID, I guess that would come back to the issue of, if someone was uninsured, but our health system does have emergency care. So I'm not really sure. My generic answer would be, I don't think so.
Right.
But again, I haven't heard about that.
Yeah, I've been tested several times and never had to pay, but this is in Fayette County.
Right.
Vaccination, of course, have been at no cost as well. I do want to hit on that point about vaccine hesitancy, particularly in communities of color. Are we seeing the wide disparities in vaccine hesitancy as we are in those who, had gotten the disease itself and maybe been hospitalized or became a morbid situation, mortality?
You're asking, are we seeing vaccine hesitancy at all, or in people who've had COVID?
Well, particularly in the African-American, Hispanic community, or is that something we all claim, but we don't really have data to prove that there's actually vaccine hesitancy?
Yeah. I mean, my feeling on it is that I think there is. I think there's some, and I know even anecdotally in my own family, not my immediate family, but it seems to cross. I think when we hear vaccine hesitancy in minority populations, we automatically say, oh, it's because of Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks, and and even the tactic that we've seen employed on the federal level is let's push some famous Black people and have them get their vaccine on camera, and then we'll show this Black researcher who was involved with the research, and that's it. And it seems like, from my experience, that's not it. I've seen a lot of, I've had anecdotally some people who are highly educated and just still don't trust the system. So I think that's another area that needs more research. I know when I was at Hopkins, there was a lot of interest in why it's more difficult to enroll Black participants in research studies. I mean, there are a lot of these things. And I think it boils down to, at the base level, mistrust of the system, but I think it needs to be teased out a little bit more, because it doesn't seem to be just related to socioeconomic status or race. It seems like there's, and probably well-founded mistrust of the system in the part of at least the African-American community because of some of the things that have happened. But I think I think sometimes the approach or the solution is too simplistic. I don't think it's so simple as to just, let's watch Oprah get a vaccine and then everyone's going to want one, because I know a lot of people who still think, well, Johnson & Johnson, experimented on the talcum powder. And I've heard, who's not Dionne Warwick, who died? Cicely Tyson got the vaccine and died a week later. I mean, there are all of these beliefs out there that I hear, and they're not coming from uneducated people. So I think it's an interesting topic, and currently I think that the biggest population of hesitancy towards vaccines is in white men in Michigan or something. I think, so I feel like people are getting the vaccine, but yeah, I think it needs to be investigated further.
You mentioned Johnson & Johnson, and when we've heard just the news today about the FDA, CDC saying, okay, let's just kind of put a pause on this because of those 6 cases of blood clotting, 1 case of death. And so do you think that will contribute even greater to vaccine hesitancy because of the Johnson & Johnson debacle?
I think it will. I think, unfortunately, for that particular vaccine, especially, I think it'll be hard to get people, even because, I think they did the right thing. They found some adverse events. It's 6. I mean, there have been plenty of people who've gotten the vaccine to date who haven't had adverse reactions, but that's the appropriate step to pause, stop giving it, figure out, what is unique about those 6 people. Maybe they all had history of blood clots. So maybe after the fact, they'll come back and say, well, after looking at it, we've decided to put a warning that no one with these characteristics should get the J&J vaccine. There may be some new information they can get in. It might be that they restarted again, but with warnings, kind of like how we say egg allergies for certain vaccines. So, we'll see. But I definitely think it was right to pause it. I do think it will. Yeah, I think if you're already hesitant about getting the vaccine, I'm certain that it will probably scare off some people. But I think from a scientific standpoint, I mean, that's what you do. You get bad results, you stop it, you investigate, they'll analyze the data, see what they can. Again, it's 6 people out of, I think I had that written down of how many. It's they've administered many. I mean, it's not like they've only administered a few. So really, it's a small number. But yeah, they'll do the right thing. They'll investigate it, and either they'll find out that it's truly unsafe, or they'll determine that there's something unique about those 6 individuals, and they'll come up with some sort of warning. But hopefully, people will continue to get at least the other 2 vaccines for now, and as others roll out, if they do, hopefully they will continue to get them, because it definitely seems to be making a difference.
There's a question here from Maureen Murphy about how the USA cannot continue not to provide health care to all through either Medicaid or Medicare for all. And that's a public policy discussion you may not want to weigh in on.
I have opinions.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what do you think about Medicare for all and universal health care, single payer system?
Yeah. Well, despite the fact that I do work for a large insurance company, my personal belief is that some version of a single payer system is probably the direction that we need to go. It's and I think the problem is that it's so politically charged. And so I think, for starters, I try to use words like universal healthcare or coverage for all. I try to avoid Medicare for all. I definitely avoid socialized medicine. A lot of those phrases that have sort of become politicized. I think we have examples of single payer systems, I'm using air quotes, that do work. The VA system works very well. I mean, it has its glitches. It's, sometimes there are long waits, and we hear about them on the news whenever something happens at the VA. But in terms of cost, if I'm in DC and I see a patient who's visiting from San Diego and they're at the VA hospital and they come in with chest pain, I can look in the system and I can see exactly what they had done a month ago. I don't have to do an unnecessary new echocardiogram and new workup, because all the information is there. So I think there are at least elements of systems that cross state borders, and where there where there's record keeping that's easily accessible. I think those are all good things about a system. And addressing the competition and drug prices is another area where I think if we had less overhead, I think it would help. Because again, I'm a personal believer that healthcare is a right. I mean, I don't think that in a country as wealthy as ours that we should have people without insurance. So yeah, I mean, I think it's, so the question was, how can they not provide healthcare? I don't know. I don't think it's right. I think there needs to be something. And I think, yes, it should include mental health. Absolutely. Because, that's a big part of a lot of these same issues, incarceration, joblessness, a lot of that has to do with mental health as well. So my hope would be that we cover more and more people, everyone.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rochelle Brown and Dr. Marlene Helm and Beth Davisson. This has been really enlightening to have these different sectors kind of merge, and we're seeing so much connectivity and intersectionality between how all of these things really affect our daily lives. And thank you for making it plain, as we would often say. It's been phenomenal discussion. And it's 8:30 on the dot. I don't know whether Miss Mary Hughes would like to come back and bid us greetings adieu, or if we can just call it out. Jen, how would you like to proceed? And I'll just say, while you're logging back on and hitting the mute button or unmuting, it's been my pleasure to be the moderator and to be a part of this effort with the League of Women Voters and all of these wonderful groups. And as a member of the Frankfort chapter of the Links Incorporated, I'm also glad to be serving in that capacity as well. So thank you for having me, and thank you all for your participation.
Thanks, Renee. I do have a few words to say. Thank you for these wonderful presentations, Dr. Helm, Ms. Davisson, and Dr. Brown. I know all of this great information you've given us will probably guide some future projects for all of our community groups. Thank you also to our hardworking partners. And I know that the League of Women Voters Lexington is looking forward to more collaboration with these groups because they're wonderful. I'd also like to thank Ms. Renee Shaw, who always ably guides our programs, or any program. So thank you, Renee. And as you know, we're going to be having a recording of this, so it'll be available in Outreach Circle or by going to the League website. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I think it was a wonderful, wonderful program. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.